Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Terry School of Advanced Studies and the United Nations Environment Programs, LBGN Initiative, and the Youth Education Alliance, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you. We thank you for taking out time to join us for the two-day workshop on building sustainable campus. We would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to UNEP, especially Mr. Sam Barrett, Mari, Karina, Naomi, Gayatri, for collaborating with Terry School of Advanced Studies for capacity building and implementing the Little Book of Green Nudges program in Higher Education Institute in India. I'm sure all of you would have referred to the link that I had shared along with the registration form that was there and would be familiar with the Little Book of Green Nudges. But I would really like to play a short film on Little Book of Green Nudges for you to get an introduction about what exactly the activity is about. So today we do have some colleges who have already signed up with us on the Little Book of Green Nudges, but we do have a large number of colleges who are yet to sort of consider signing up for this. So I will request all of you to visit the website of UNEP. We will be sharing the link in the chat box in a moment, and you can use that as well to actually access the Little Book of Green Nudges. We would be sharing the link to the book as also, and again, as I said, we would be sharing the link to join or sign up for the Little Book of Green Nudges program that's there. I know some of you have already shared that all the amazing things that you are doing in your campus. So maybe I can just quickly share. Some of you have put it in the chat box, but I can also see that you have put it in the Mentimeter link, and we see water treatment, recycling bio-waste, bringing one's own, I think it's container or some, it's not come completely, paper recycling facility, plantation drives, again, solar energy, waste management strongly emerging in this, plastic-free, carry your own cup, cooler in canteen, composting, and a lot of green initiatives. And I'm sure when you look at the Little Book of Green Nudges, you'll find many of them there as well. And these were practices probably traditionally we were actually following, but on our rush to develop our country, somewhere we forgot about these traditional practices. So sometimes these nudges also take us back to the roots. So the workshop is scheduled for today and tomorrow, and we have 4 themes on which we would be delivering this workshop. The first one is on rainwater harvesting and water conservation practices. The second would be on sustainable food in your canteen. The third one would be on renewable energy, and the fourth one is on waste management and even composting, and even household level composting is something that we will cover in that. So it's mandatory for you to attend the training program on both days to get a certificate. As mentioned in my mail that I had shared with you, we would be taking attendance twice today and twice tomorrow. And whosoever would be present throughout would only be eligible to get a certificate. So we will move on to our first session, the rainwater harvesting session. And we are honored to have Mr. Sunil Mysore, who is the CEO of Hindran Engineering, with us. Sunil has a background in civil engineering, and his expertise is in decentralized water management, rainwater harvesting, alternate energy, particularly solar power. And his company, Hindran Engineering, he is promoting and popularizing alternate energy and rainwater harvesting in a cost-effective manner. His vision is to make clean water and clean energy accessible to all sections of the society. You know, it says you practice before you preach. So if you happen to be in Bangalore and get a chance to visit his house, he has actually been able to convert his traditional house into a full-fledged, you know, green, with all the green features. And he has green energy, like solar. He has rainwater harvesting within his house. Even he has rooftop kitchen garden that is there. Thank you very much, Sunil, for taking out time to join us today. Over to you. So I'll request that you keep the session for 45 minutes maybe, and then we can have question and answer for 15 minutes. I'll request the participants to keep typing their questions in the chat box, and we will take your questions towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the good introduction. We will just take an overview of the rainwater harvesting principles, which can be adopted pretty much in any kind of a campus. I will run through very few technical details. I'll not go more into technicalities and designs and engineering point. I'll stick to very generic points, and we can have a more broader discussion, because the technical stuff actually can vary from site to site. But the broad principle on which how you can store or how you can recharge pretty much remains the same. So today I will concentrate mostly on techniques, like in terms of like universal techniques and how this can be adopted. And at the end of the lecture, let me just touch upon on something called as recharge wells, which can be very much conducive for large campuses. So let me begin with a small introduction regarding water per se. Then we'll get into rainwater harvesting. So bear with me till I share the presentation. I don't know how this works, but yeah, you're able to see my screen? Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, yes, we are able to see it.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So we will talk about, I was given topic of rainwater harvesting and water conservation. Well, they're actually very two different topics. So let me see how I can merge and talk to you, because rainwater harvesting, we are talking mostly from the supply side, how we can augment the supply of water. But it is just not enough to just talk about the supply. Most important in today's scenario is not actually the supply, it's actually the demand. How we can become more efficient, how we can conserve water, what we can do to use less water, what we can do to predominantly to consume less, because there is actually inherent water in everything what we consume. Okay, so we will talk about both in the given space, and we will discuss after this. You know, any questions or any kind of topics which we can discuss further, we will definitely do it. Okay, so we will talk on both water conservation and rainwater harvesting. So we will now see why exactly we will talk about these two things. We have to first understand the scenario. See, if you are talking about say 25 years back, rainwater harvesting as a term was not this popular. Okay, we used to have some kind of terminologies here and there, but it's not as popular. This jargon of rainwater harvesting, this whole talk about narrative about rainwater harvesting wouldn't be so much say about 20-25 years back. So what we have done in the 25 years back is most important. Our rainfall in India has remained pretty much constant from the time we started recording the data. So roughly everybody agrees we have an endowment of roughly 1,600 billion cubic meters of water, which actually falls on our surface. Okay, assuming that 50% reaches the seas, we still have about 800 billion liters. Okay, so if you have a population of 1.3 crores, so
Sunil, are you changing your slides? Because if you're changing your slides, we are not able to see. Huh?
No, I'm not changing. It's still here.
Okay.
I'm changing the slides. Don't worry.
And you have. I'll request you to put it on slideshow when you start to.
It is in slideshow, right?
No, it is. To us, it's not showing slideshow. It's
For me, it's full screen.
No, it's not showing us full screen, but it's okay. It's visible, so you may continue.
I don't know. Is there any other way of sharing? I am not sure.
No, I think it's okay. Just on your toolbar, if you see slideshow.
Yeah, I am putting on. For me, it's full screen.
Okay, so there could be some issue for which we are not able to see it, but it's perfect. We can see the fonts are pretty big.
Oh, I think I just lost it somewhere now. I think it's there or gone?
It's gone.
Well, entire screen. How about now? Is it visible now?
Yes, it is visible. Yeah, it's perfect now. Now it's in.
Yeah, it's okay now.
Yep. Good. Thank you.
Yeah. So I was talking about the net endowment of water that we get in the country. So pretty much it is same from the time we actually started recording data. So if we actually crystallize this further, what is it that each person in the country can get? Like, if you actually divide it for the academic interest, let us see, we are getting the 1600 billion cubic meters, out of which 50% goes to the seas. And still what translates is we can get about 6,15,300 liters of water endowment per person. So if you want to do it like per day divided by 365, so everybody in India can technically get 1,600 liters of water. This is what actually everybody in India consumes. Okay, we are only talking about 135 as for our potable use and cooking and etc. But our net inherent water in our food, in fuel, in our transportation, etc., all adds up much larger. Okay, so our daily what we see as shower or shaving or brushing teeth is actually very small part about the net amount of water we actually consume. So here is where the catch comes. It is just not about switching off your tap or conserving rainwater. It's also about consuming less and consuming more efficiently, because a large percentage of our water actually goes into our consumption elsewhere, not exactly here. Okay, so this is the point what I want to make. Okay, so I'll go. So now just think about this. Like, what does this mean in terms of energy? Like how much energy we consume? What does it mean in terms of that? Okay, so we have suppose if we are saying everybody consumes 1600 liters of water a day, it means we are consuming something equivalent to 1600 kgs of energy. Okay, this is the kind of energy we consume. As an individual of 50-80 kgs, we consume an energy which is 1600 kilograms. Okay, so that is 20-30 times our weight. Okay, so imagine what the other living beings in this world, for example, a tiger, lion, deer, how much they consume. So they consume far lesser. So our consumption pattern is heavily skewed, and we have a heavy energy footprint, heavy water footprint for our daily basis. It's just food for thought, so that we become a little aware of what we are consuming. How much is it in terms of water as well? Okay, so next, and this is our domestic stuff. Okay, how much actually we consume in terms of our domestic requirement. See, we have heard of this thing: 200 LPCD, 185 LPCD, 135 LPCD. Okay, so it's 135 LPCD is actually what we actually take for most of our design consideration. I told you we are consuming far higher, 1600 in terms of our total water footprint, but our conspicuous visible water footprint is this. How did we arrive at 135? These are the numbers. This is how actually we get it 135. This number can vary from region to region, state to state, country to country. By and large, in India, we take 135 as our standard for calculation. Okay, so what I wanted to make point here is 135 per liters what we consume every day is hardly about 8, 9, 10% of our total water consumption. So of course, we have to conserve here as well. Plus, we have to largely conserve on our indirect water consumption, like our consumption pattern, food, travel, other kinds of conspicuous consumptions that we are involved in. Okay, this is the point I want to make. There are really two things. Rainwater harvesting is one. Water conservation is completely different. Though they are connected, but conservation plays a very important role. Water conservation just not by switching off the tap, but changing to a more sustainable kind of consumption. Okay, so I don't want to go more into water because all of us know, what is the cost of water. We are heavily subsidized. The water in India is extremely subsidized. So most people don't even earn as much as actually the cost of water is. If you even take about at 126 rupees, so many people don't even earn 126 rupees. So the water what we actually get from municipal supply is heavily subsidized. It's far lower than the true cost of water. Okay. So now again, we will come back to the two definitions, rainwater harvesting and water conservation. Rainwater harvesting is largely a supply side issue. We are actually trying to augment the supply. We're trying to catch the water which falls on the roof and try to divert it into the rain barrels or underground tanks or the recharge structure. Water conservation is just switching. Again, you can divide into two parts. One is switching to a far better efficient water consumption in terms of households using aerators, better kinds of taps, better showers and water efficient devices. That is for our conspicuous 135 liters consumption. And the second part of water conservation is change in lifestyle itself, like converting into a more sustainable, less energy consuming lifestyle. Okay, like biking or maybe using less paper and so on and so forth. So we can go and talk a lot about it. We can have a separate session on actually sustainable lifestyles. Okay, so these are the two things which I wanted to make a point here. So now we will come to rainwater harvesting per se. Why do we talk about the decentralization? All of us people staying in Delhi will know water is coming from about 30-40 kilometers away from the Jamuna basin. People in Bangalore will know we are getting Kaveri, which is about easily 120 kilometers away and 500 meters deep. So there's so much of conveyance, so much of energy used in actually conveying the water, so much of wear and tear of the pipe, so much infrastructure required, so much land is required in actually conveying the water. So decentralization is one of the mantras. So I've just given you a case study for the city of Bangalore, a city of 710 kilometers receiving about 950 mm. This year we have crossed 1100 mm, by the way, and still counting. It rained actually yesterday. Even December 15th, we had rain in Bangalore. So total runoff, even assuming 50% actually goes, it's such a big number. With the population of about a little more than 1 crore, 208 days of water requirement of city of Bangalore can be met by just the rainwater falling on the city. You don't have to go beyond that. See, people coming from Bangalore or southern India will know there's a big history to Bangalore's water. We went going far, and now we are 120 kilometers, and now we are talking about the next source of water, the river Sharavati, which is 300 kilometers away. So a good part of the city's demand can be met by rainwater. This is what I wanted to actually stress this point. See, our city planners are actually mostly concerned about the water falling much away. See, it's falling in the city of Kodagu or Coorg, which is 300 kilometers away. That is the catchment area for the city of Bangalore. We are not actually addressing the catchment city of the city itself. Okay, so the city itself can actually give you a large portion of the water. So you can crystallize this into further. A city can be further, can be got into the ward level, can be got into the institution level, at the community level, and can be got into the household level. So at every point, you can actually start conserving water, rather collecting the rainwater. Okay, so every bit of catchment, every bit of roof area, land area, road, park can be actually treated as catchment, treat it with some amount of salinity, collect the water, and you can more or less most of your water demand can be met. Okay, so this is another case study. Now we talked about the city. Now we talk about a house. This is my house, roughly about 1,100 square feet with 950 mm. I can meet about 165. This is extremely conservative. I have taken a heavy consumption. We are actually consuming 135, which is actually a little higher. Plus, we receive far more rainfall than 950. Plus, I've taken 15% loss because I have a roof garden which actually which picks up a lot of water, which doesn't actually flow. So I've taken a 15% loss. Even at this, I can actually meet 45%. This year, we have far more. Almost 70% of our requirement this year has come from rainwater alone. And I'm not dependent on the municipal water. Okay, in fact, we can stretch up to 100%. I know many people in actually Bangalore, Mysore, actually 100% only on rainwater. It is very much possible. And if you do rainwater consistently, you can actually augment the groundwater to such an extent, the groundwater can become your primary source. We can talk about it later if the time permits. So this is a simple calculation, how one can actually estimate rainwater. It's true for campuses, true for houses. You can take it to any. I've spoken about the city. I've spoken about how the same kind of argument goes for any kind of catchment. There's something called as a runoff coefficient. We'll not go into technicalities, but pretty much what I'm saying is there's a large amount of water which is flowing off your campuses, which can meet significant part of your requirement. For example, if you talk about a university campus, it's large and their water footprint is low because other than the hostels, there is no large consumption. Maybe landscape, most people are using wastewater. But the other, whatever is the requirement for like washing or hand wash for toilets and even for portable use, here the catchments are significant. Actually, one can do a calculation. You go to an IIM Bangalore, an IISc, the water falling on the campus is far excess of the water actually used. The maximum water is used only in hostels. In other places where there is no 24/7 consumption, the water footprint is low, runoff is high. So if one can design and catch this water where it falls, large part, I can even say you can even harvest far more water than what actually required. All it needs is little bit of engineering and most of common sense. Okay, so I happened to see this green nudges document which was shared with me. So I have also shared my own nudges, like, I have been writing about this, what are the small initiatives that one can do to actually make your life more and more sustainable. It's a 3-part series. I've actually completed 2 parts. The 3rd part is pending. So these are the links. You can read through the very, very small nudges, like what can be done, like painting the roof white, and changing your water tap to a low head water tap, and shunning away the RO this thing. So there are small nudges that one can actually implement to become a little more sustainable than how you are. So it has to be a step-by-step process. You can't just say, okay, once for I'll start and okay, I will do this or do that. Okay, so these are the 2-part series. The links are given. If anybody interested, they can just definitely go through that. And this is my rainwater harvesting video of my house. So this will take about a couple of minutes. I will try to play this video. Okay, so this shows how water is being harvested. So all the technology, what I spoke about, I'm not going into detail of runoff coefficient, how to calculate the water, what is the diameter of pipe, but I will give you an overview of how rainwater harvesting can be done in perhaps any kind of a campus. Let me see if this video plays.
Sunil, it will play, but you will have to, prior to that, you will have to share the computer sound here. Or the other thing you can do is you can put the link in the chat box and I can play it from my end.
Computer sound is, I think, is coming up. You're able to hear the video?
Yes, I can hear it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
This is Sunil. It's raining pretty well here. I am on my roof. This makes the catchment for my rainwater harvesting. You can see the catchment is the rooftop garden, the solar panels. The water which falls here goes through a filter and gets into the sump. Let's go and check out how the water is harvested. So the water which falls on the roof first comes into this first cane separator. This is the first cane separator. The first minute of water is stored in this pipe, which gets drained into the well, and the water which builds into this sedimentation tank. The water which builds in this first cane separator goes to the sedimentation tank. This is also to separate out the first 2 minutes of water. All the dirt basically settles in this tank. The water in this tank can be used for non-potable use like car wash or gardening. The water which overflows from this sedimentation tank gets into this filter. This is a 2-chamber filter. The water first gets in here. You can see the water coming here. This is the water which is overflowing from the sedimentation tank. The water gets down from this tank. This has aggregates, silex and activated carbon. The water goes down like this, and from bottom again it builds up. So it's called an upflow filter. The water comes up in this chamber, gets into this second chamber. You can see here inside. Again, this has got silex and activated carbon. The water upflows from here and gets into this pipe. This goes into our storage tank. You can see this is the rainwater being harvested, getting right into our underground sump. In case the water overflows from this sump, we have got a recharge well here. In case the water overflows from the tank, that goes into this recharge well and augments the groundwater. We can also open the first rain separator. That the first rain water also gets into this well. I'll just show it to you now. Now the rains have stopped. This is the filter. Some water is standing here. Now we can come this side. So this is a valve. This is given to sample the water. See, if you open this valve, say if I open this valve, I can collect the water for sampling. So this is the filtered water, the rainwater filtered water. I can collect the water from this valve and send the water for testing. So this is the water collected from the rainwater filter. So now you can see there is this water standing here. This is an upflow filter. There is some water standing here, and we will show another valve here. This is another valve on this side. So here, this valve, if we open this valve, is going to backwash the filter. So after every rain, this can be opened, and the water standing in the filter will automatically backwash all the filter media, and the water will go out. This water we can use for floor swabbing or floor cleaning or any other non-potable use. You can come here and see this is the water standing here. Now I will open the valve. You can observe what happens. See, now I have opened the valve. So this is the water getting backwashed. You can come here and have a look. Now all the water is going down from the filter. So all the water now has gone out, and now the filter is empty to receive the next rain. Thank you. So this was a brief introduction on, like, how rainwater harvesting can be done. This is for a small house. This can be actually done for an apartment or industry or a campus or whatever. Okay, any catchment can be taken for either recharge or storage. Okay, so I will not get into the details of why to store, when to recharge, and so on. Basically, do anything. Ultimately, the idea is save the water. Okay, either you store and use or put it into the ground for your own use later or somebody else's use, or just to actually augment the groundwater. See, if the groundwater is saturated, by and large, the country is good. Okay, the problem is, like, if the groundwater is not there, and if the soil is dry and parched, you have all kinds of problems in society. Yeah, so do whatever. Ultimately, the idea is don't let the water get into the sewer lines or join the nala or something like that, and let it go waste. As much as possible, try to use it as locally as possible. Okay. So again, see, I hope I've got a little more time, so I will stress upon the most important thing, that is the groundwater recharge. Like, for large campuses, for example, if you're talking about 700 acres, 500 acres, mostly it's open areas, either roads or gardens or pavements, or largely open areas where groundwater recharge is actually extremely important. Okay, so I will talk a little bit of this groundwater recharge and also talk about the economics. A lot of times, when I am talking to people, talking to customers, talking to academia, they all ask, what is the cost? How much can we save? Is it worth it? Why isn't the government doing? So let me try to address few of these as much as I possibly can in the limited time. Okay, so now, as I told you, there are many ways actually you can do groundwater recharge. Most important, you consume less, you are actually saving some other part of the groundwater or some other part of the fresh water. So plant trees, make trenches, recharge wells, stormwater infiltration wells, lakes, so on and so forth. There are many ways. Okay, we are talking, of course, other than consuming less, we'll just talk about now groundwater recharge in terms of actually how you make a trench and leave the water inside, what actually happens after that. Okay, so generally this is the geology in Bangalore or most of the Deccan Plateau. This is actually the geology. So mostly what we are doing is we actually put borewells and try to extract water from very deep strata. Like, generally in Bangalore, yesterday I saw a borewell of 1,700 feet. More than 1,000 has become very, very common. So this is a very approximate and very generalistic geology I've tried to draw. But our point of interest is this, you know, say before 1967, there was no concept of borewell. The UNICEF guys got this borewell to India, okay, for a very short duration of time. They said, okay, this can give you water because you are at certain parts, you know, there was so parts, you know, they said, okay, go deeper and get the water. But now that borewell and this borewell machine became a like a way of life. Now, you know, everywhere, you know, you see borewell machines. Okay, so 40 years back, there was nobody heard of a term called borewell. It was very, very rare. Mostly people used to think about a recharge well or a withdrawal well, which is not more than 30, 40 feet deep. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you is, see, you can actually look at these as perhaps a withdrawal well. If not, you can look at it as a recharge well as well. The water coming from the roofs or the pavements or the garden can be easily diverted into these small cavities into the earth, which will saturate your groundwater because, you know, technically speaking, these are all unconfined. So the recharge strata or the recharge zone or the zone of influence is so less that, you know, the around this well soil will get saturated. At some point of the time, the other, the water will start coming back into these wells because this will start behaving like a sponge. And in most landscaping requirements, this will become a very good source of water because you're only pumping it from hardly 30, 40 feet. Vis-a-vis, compare this with 1,400, 1,500, where you're also not only taking the water, you're also taking some heavy metals and perhaps in certain places even arsenic and mercury. Okay, so this is approximate geology what I wanted to talk, so that, you know, people, you get an idea of, you know, where actually you can actually source or even where you can also put the water for future use. So small technical detail. Okay, see, this is roughly our earth surface, and we have a recharge well or a withdrawal well, what I'm talking about. See, this is our surface, and we are sinking a small cavity here. So most of the water, what we see in the traditional open wells, see, people in Delhi may appreciate, I don't know, the older folks may appreciate, there was this Agrasen Ki Bawli near Connaught Place, where I was told there was water. The time when I went there was no water. I thought it is just an architectural feature for people to come and take selfies, but then I was told up till 1980s there was water there. I'm talking about this water. It's unconfined water, sweet water, by and large free from any kind of contamination. And that area of influence is so small that, you know, any recharge here actually can make this water yield here. Compare that with the confined aquifer, which is actually between two layers of confined layers. Generally, this will be shale or clay or quartz, some kind of a geological formation, and the water will be here. Sorry, and the water will be here, which will be under pressure. So when you're drawing water, of course, the water will come under pressure, but you're also talking about a lot of other kind of chemical contamination which can come with that, and which also has a very high inherent energy to actually suck that water. And mostly the recharge area or the source of this water will be very, very far from the point from where we actually extract this water. So there are two real kinds of structure. The recharge or the withdrawal structure, what we are talking about, is very shallow, 20, 30, 40 feet, and the confined aquifer or the deep borewell, which are like mostly in the Deccan Plateau has crossed 1,000 feet now. Okay, so I'll not get into the hydrogeology and other kinds of engineering considerations, but what I wanted to tell is, like, you know, these are the structures which can be used for actually putting the water back into the soil. So small, little bit technical stuff. Essentially, it's just an open cavity. They're using the hydrostatic pressure, mostly governed by the depth or the height, which actually increases the hydrostatic pressure and which makes the water go into the soil layers and augment the groundwater. So you can pick up perhaps any kind of water, rooftop, roads, parks, catchments, any kind of water you can actually take, put it through a very small basic filtration to only sediments of the plastic and any kinds of physical contamination, and put the water here. The earth is the best kind of filter. Okay, you can use it to push the water inside the earth, and after some time you can use the same well to actually take the water outside. I am talking about like a traditional open well. You know, if you come to Kerala, even, you know, there was this very famous, Gurudwara in Delhi, that is, it's not getting the name, it is Bangla Sahib, something like that is there, where water was so sweet even up till 2000, 2004, 2005. You know, only after this metro came up, you know, the sewage started contaminating the well, and now it's closed. What I'm trying to tell you is these wells can be, if not withdrawal wells, can be used for actually putting the water back into them. If you don't have one such well, you can actually make it. It's not such a big deal. Making this kind of a well is about 2 days affair. Okay, so this is a typical cross section of how the well looks like. These are extremely easy to do in large campuses. I have done hundreds of them in engineering colleges, in the spiritual institutions, and these have worked wonders. These are like deeper. So if you don't have space to go broader, you just go deeper and put the water. Because of hydrostatic pressure, this actually makes your soil like a sponge. And at some point of time, you can withdraw the water back. And I've got some videos on this kind of stuff, which are there on the YouTube channel. I'll try to put the link in the chat box. You can have a look at that. So this is how actually the wells are being made. All these are in large campuses. Okay, well, the amount of space taken is very less, but the amount of catchment this kind of wells can cater to is just pretty large. So this is another picture. These are all pictures of the wells. These are all done in Fusion. This is in a large power. This is in a large garment factory. This is in an apartment complex. This is in a spiritual institution. So this is a typical well. We can also make it look nice. This is actually in a Wipro campus in Bangalore. See, this is the beauty. See, now you've got water. You've got water at 7 feet in this well. Even while doing, we got water. See, again, this is water here. Water in the well. See, water is available. By next few days, I'll share you one more video where bore wells are not getting water, but the recharge well just 10 feet away from that is actually getting you water. I'm just waiting for test reports. But the moment it comes, I'll publish it and maybe I'll share the data with you. So again, this is another well. Even before the rings are placed, you are getting water back. There's water here. These are pre-filters. You can make trenches if you don't have space for even wells. Idea is to actually just make the water stand and soak into the earth. These are different kinds of. This is actually, by the way, this is an agricultural institute in Bangalore. Again, agricultural institute in Bangalore, where the water is actually drawn. This is actually what you see is about 10 feet deep. So I'll not go more into details of the economics, but very, very simply put, if I am actually taking water from a 20 feet deep well, what is it going to cost me? Like, people who have got economic bent of mind, this is for them. Suppose if I want to pump the water 40 feet from my well to the rooftop, how much I'm going to spend? So 40 feet of pumping at roughly 1500 liters per hour, if I use a 0.5 HP, is going to consume roughly 0.4 units of energy. 0.5 HP into 1 hour is 0.38 kilowatt into 1 hour. That is 0.38 units of energy. So to pump 1500 liters, I'm only using 0.4 or 0.38 to be precise. So what does it make in terms of energy? If I multiply into 5, in most places not 5, it's even less than 5. In Delhi, the first 200 units is free. So you're going 1.9 rupees for 1500 liters. Or if I want to do it in kiloliters, it's 1.26. So if for only 1.5 rupees, I can get 1000 liters of fresh sweet water. This is the cost. The municipality can charge you anywhere between 5 to 25 rupees per kiloliter. The tanker cost in most parts of India has crossed 100 rupees a kiloliter, and the quality is not guaranteed. But look at this, a recharge well in your house or in your complex or wherever it is. If you are getting water from there, you are getting perhaps the sweetest and the best quality of water at the cheapest possible price. 1.26 is still on the higher side. A 0.5 HP pump can pump larger than 1500 liters of water. Cost of energy in most cases is less than 5. Okay, sometimes it's free. If you use solar, it's free. So you are getting 1000 liters of water for 1.26. So add the cost of capital, compound interest, and recurring cost, maintenance, etc. Even if you take 2 rupees, I'm putting 75 paisa extra, almost 60% extra on this. Still, it is 2 rupees per kiloliter, and that is way cheaper than any conventional source of water. You're talking about municipality or the borewell or the tanker or your desalination plants, wastewater treatment plants. Everywhere the water is going to cost you far more than this. Okay, look at this. This is our consumption. I'm talking about Bangalore. First 8,000 liters is 7 rupees. Our well was 1.5, 2 rupees. And look at, if I cross 25,000, this is domestic, this is not even industrial, 26 rupees. If I have more than 50,000, I'm going to pay 45 rupees a kiloliter. This is domestic. And mind you, this is still not the true cost of water. This is again extremely subsidized. If you look at the true cost of water, even the government water supply boards are spending anywhere between between 30 to 40 rupees per kiloliter just to get it to your tap. They're subsidizing it almost about 50-60% to actually give you the water at this cost. And tanker cost, it's ever increasing. Every time there's a diesel price increase, tanker prices increases. Quality is not guaranteed. And in most parts of India, it's well over 100 rupees per kiloliter. So we are talking about even the economic point of view, using rainwater, as locally as possible is an extremely lucrative investment. And of course, quality is guaranteed. But of course, we end up doing something like this. It's unfortunate, but the idea of sharing this, is like, even though the old wells are there, we fail to recognize its value and try to use it as dump yards. Okay, so I generally conclude by saying, there's a lot of jargon around the rainwater harvesting, lot of jargon around water harvesting, this, etc. The problem is most things are extremely simple to do, but we are caught up in this jargon, and there's a lot of so-called innovation and seminars and conferences that we actually miss small implementable nudges, and we end up only glorifying stuff and not actually doing anything else. So this is a very popular saying by economists who says, you start refuting false dogmas first, and the knowledge is just not by repeating known things. So you refute the false dogmas, get on to your basics, and things will be far better. Okay, so in engineering point of view, I'm not talking much, but if you want to talk rainwater harvesting as a practice, in my opinion, what is required now is we need skill dissemination, we need knowledge dissemination, we need people to understand. More than understand, we need people to appreciate it. Things like this can work. Things like this is doable. Things like this is far more efficient. When people can appreciate, they'll definitely learn. Once they learn, the engineering comes about it. So the idea is, first we need to have a social acceptance. We need to have people to appreciate these things. I'm not at all talking about technology. There's nothing to do with technology here. It's extremely simple. Put a bucket when the water is falling, that's rainwater harvesting. Constructing a dam is rainwater harvesting. See, technology is secondary. The thing is, first is the intention to do something. Second is appreciation, like how it has to be done. Okay, if we can do this, personally, it's my opinion. I'm not really forcing this on anyone else, but this is what I think, because I have been meeting a lot of people. And in most cases, when I go to these colleges, there's a big seminar, conferences, people eat cashew nuts and talk about rainwater harvesting. But after that, nothing really happens. Okay, the idea is we need to get this onto the ground. We need to start implementing stuff, however small it is. The idea is to actually make a start, and make a start as simple as small as possible. Now, I think I've got another 2-3 minutes to go. So let me just summarize it, that if we take a holistic approach, what it means, we just talk about house or campus or something like that. But water is far bigger than that. Okay, so essentially water is energy. Okay, and everything what we consume, suppose now I'm talking to you over on this, I'm consuming some electricity, you are consuming some electricity. This electricity is perhaps generated from a thermal plant which is using water, or this electricity is being used by a hydro plant to generate electricity. I am drinking some water here, and I'm sitting on a chair that has taken some water to manufacture. So this actually, if you look at this thing, it's a full cycle. Okay, so we use energy for water, again we use water for energy. So it just goes on. This is a strong nexus. So decentralization can break this nexus to a large extent. Suppose if you are doing your rainwater harvesting and just taking it to the plants on your rooftop, you are not dependent on external source of water, both for your energy as well as nutrition. Okay, so there's a big need actually. There's a need to actually break this nexus. But this is the holistic view of water. See, we need water for every kind of process that we actually do. Okay, see, look at this. Same thing I'm trying to illustrate here. See, if you use water to irrigate crops, it can promote food production at the same time, reduce your electricity consumption because your hydro potential is compromised. If you use bioenergy crops, it can increase, it will take far amount of water, and you are producing energy, food for energy, and you are compromising on food security. So if you take high energy pressurized irrigation, perhaps you are giving more water, but at the same time using more energy. So it's all jinxed. So we need to actually, this is very, very, at the universal level, this is actually very, very jinxed, So we need to have innovate hybrid decentralized approach to actually de-jinx the entire thing. Okay, that is a way forward in my opinion. Okay, so closing remarks, what I would say is most important is consume less. If you're unable to consume less, consume efficiently. Like, just don't waste, because lot of things, that is a lot of water in that. The amount of packaging that we throw every day, the amount of plastics we throw every day, the amount of food we actually use, it's criminal. So we have to consume less, or if we just cannot consume less, our lifestyle doesn't permit us to consume less, at least consume sustainability, consume efficiently, consume water, energy, water positive products, so that the net impact on the community or the climate is far lesser. And second thing, not to mention, like, I don't want to over stress, but one of the best way to conserve water is to plant trees, plant more trees. Okay, trees are the something which can actually attract water, hold water, give you water when you require. Okay, so it has to go hand in hand and get as decentralized as possible in terms of food, energy, water. Try to harvest water from your houses, in your campuses. Try to grow as much nutrition as possible. Very easy to grow beans, lemons, papaya. All that can be done in very, very small places. Okay, campuses are large. Actually, I have seen some campuses where they have put acres and acres of lawn. I don't know, if you teach water efficiency there, conspicuously your water inefficient, there's no point talking about water efficiency in classrooms. Okay, so we have to practice what we preach. So there's no point in making 1,000 acres of lawn and teaching water efficiency inside. Most of the campuses can grow their shade. I'm talking in terms of the energy, the shade they require to actually sit and do their work there. They can grow enough nutrition, enough fruits to actually be sustainable right there. You don't have to bring fruits to the hostel from outside. You can do a lot of things. Switch to solar energy, switch to biking, switch to more energy efficiency, so that as much as possible you are trying to decentralize. You're not putting water or energy in terms of transportation. Pollute less. Another good way of water conservation is pollute less. Don't put sewage into the rivers. It can go a long way. Most importantly, I already told you, preach less and practice more. The idea is to actually get onto the ground and do something. Okay, it can go wrong, doesn't matter. But the idea is, we don't want to get caught in this jargon. Idea is to actually get going. Even just put a bucket and save the water when it's flowing out. Tomorrow morning, use it for washing your car. Start small, but do something. Idea is sitting and writing big articles, giving conferences is of absolutely no value if you're actually not preaching that. Idea is, we have to get onto the ground. We have to practice what we talk. We have to show it by good example. That's the only way. The only way we can tell a person do this, it's good, is to actually by doing it yourself. When you show, okay, this is going to work environmentally, financially, spiritually, whatever, you do it, and then it's become easy to actually for knowledge to propagate. Okay, so there's some personal initiative. I put it in my blog and I made a video on that, so we can actually have a look. This is my concluding remarks. Unless we don't be a change ourselves, it's no use talking. So we have to actually be the change, and then change will happen automatically. So that's about it. Any discussions, any point, any criticisms, I am more than happy to take it.
Thank you very much, Sunil. I think that was, given the time, it was definitely very comprehensive. And, as I stated in the beginning, Sunil actually walks every talk that he does.